If I were to ask you the question of what is healthy, how would you answer that? How would anybody know what's healthy? Is there a standard for what's healthy? What I've learned, I came across this model, it was shared with me in my schooling, called the Johari window. The Johari window has affected me in a lot of ways for good. It helped me to know what is healthy, because I don't think that we always know what healthy is. All that we know about life is what we've experienced. I know people, I've talked with people, I've asked them, have you ever been abused? And they'll say, no. And I'll ask them, do you know what abuse is? And they'll say, well, I think I do. And I begin to explain what healthy is. And they'll look at me and say, well, I guess based upon what you're telling me what healthy is, yeah, I've been abused. So a lot of times we don't know the difference. All that we know is what we've experienced. That's what I like about the Johari window. I'd like to share with you the Johari window just briefly. Then I want to go back and spiritualize it and tell you how or why I think Joe and Harry discovered something that the scripture's been teaching all along. Joe and Harry said that each of us have 4 different parts to ourselves. By the way, Joe and Harry were psychologists studying human growth and development, more particularly personality development. And in their observational studies, they had observed that each of us have 4 different parts to ourselves. We have a public self, we have a hidden self, an other self, and an unknown self. The public self box represents what I know about myself to be true and what others know about me to be true. The hidden self box is what I know about myself to be true that nobody else knows. The other self box is what I don't know about myself to be true, but other people know about me to be true. And then the final box, the unknown self box, is what I don't know about myself to be true and nobody else knows. It's yet to be discovered. Joe and Harry says that those 4 boxes are active in every one of us. However, Joe and Harry says that the bigger your public self box is, that is what I know about myself to be true and is what others know about me to be true. The bigger that box is, the more healthy you are. In other words, the more secrets you have, the less healthy you are. The more that you don't know about yourself, the less healthy you are. And the more that you don't know what you don't know, the less healthy you are. And so Joe and Harry says that the challenge in life is to grow your public self box. It's an interesting thought, because a lot of times we grow up in a life and we're told, this is our secret, don't tell anybody, or this is a family secret, don't mention this. Or we find maybe even groups of people, maybe denominations, even churches, are very secretive churches. And if that's the case, that's probably not a real healthy thing, at least according to Joe and Harry. I've taken that model, and one challenge that I've always tried to do when I've learned something outside of biblical teaching is to take that and filter it through the scriptures to see if it's consistent with the scriptures. I feel like Joe and Harry had discovered something in observational learning that the scriptures have been teaching us all along. Like, for instance, the public self box. I think about in Genesis chapters 2 and 3, we talk about the creation story. God created Adam and Eve, and they were perfect in every way. They had a great relationship one with another and with God. It's evident that we were created to be relational. They were naked and unashamed. They had nothing to hide. It was a perfect time. It was beautiful. In Psalm 139, it teaches us that God formed us in our mother's womb, and that He created us, must have given us our bent. If you have more than one child, you know that each child is different. We may call it our bent. God gave that to us, and He gave us our gifts and our talents. And so when we're free to be ourselves the way God created us, and without fear of ridicule or abuse, and we have good relationships with people around us, such as like Adam and Eve in the garden and with God, is probably the essence of life. Money cannot buy that. That is Joe and Harry saying the bigger that box is, the more healthy you are. And I'm saying, based upon the scriptures, I agree. That's probably absolutely true. However, we don't live very long, though, in life before we realize that the world's broken. According to the scriptures, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. So you have, like Romans 3:10 teaches us that there's none righteous, no, not one. We understand it. Most people understand that we've sinned and the world's fallen and is broken. And we know that bad things happen. We've done bad things and bad things happen to us. And so the challenge is not that it's happened. The greater challenge is, what do we do after it's happened? Our tendency is to protect ourselves. And so maybe it's God-given, but our tendency is that if something bad happens to us before we know how to process it, or if the trauma is so severe that we don't know how to deal with it, our tendency sometimes to protect ourselves is to block it. We can block out these emotions or feelings, or at least not deal with them at the moment. Or we can deny them, or we can suppress them. We can justify, or we can blame. Those are the ways that we protect ourselves from pain. It's interesting that God's way is confession, because our natural tendencies want to hide it. And that's usually where we find ourselves getting in bondage. If we have a secret and we don't know what to do with it, that secret begins to control us. It'll tell us where we go, who we talk to, who we don't talk to, what subjects we're going to talk about, whether we go to the family reunion or not. We're held in bondage. The more secrets we have, the more in bondage we are. How do we deal with them? Most of us don't know how. So it opens the door for being pretentious. So we find ourselves acting a certain way, trying to cover it up because we feel shameful. We feel like everybody can see us. They know what's going on. So we even in our own minds might think we're a freak of some sort. God said, no, let's talk about it. Let's confess it. What's interesting about the word confess is what it means. If I was to ask you, what does the word confess mean? How would you answer that? I think the answer would be something like it means to tell, or it means to admit to or acknowledge, or even come in an agreement with God or agreement with truth. So you often hear about the truth setting us free in John 8:32. 1 John 1:9 says, if we confess our sins, He's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. It also says in the book of James in 5:16, it says not only to confess to God, but it says to confess one to another. God's way of dealing with our pain, God's way of dealing with our secrets is to confess it. The challenge is to find somebody that you can trust and to be able to talk that you can feel comfortable with, to be able to tell your story. By doing that, we shrink that box, which enlarges our public self box. Now we're no longer in bondage to that. We're more free to be whom God created us to be. We find ourselves being freed. It's a wonderful thing. So I think Johari understood that we all have that hidden self, which is what the scriptures teach us. The challenge is, how do we shrink that box? I'm going to say to you that the most effective way, according to the scriptures at least, is to make confession. The other self box represents what other people know about us that we don't know about ourselves. It's an interesting box if you think about it. You would think after living with yourself, like in my case for 57 years, I should know everything there is about me to know. How is it that someone can know something about me that I don't know about myself? I think honestly, that's why God gives us spouses and children. There's been too many times I've heard, honey, can I tell you something? But the truth of the matter is that it's possible, and it is also true. Have you ever thought about the way we were created? There's some things about us that we were never meant to see. Like, for instance, our face, or even our backside. What is it about us that we don't know about ourselves? And I think it goes into the areas of like our blind spots. Proverb says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. It's a paradox. You wouldn't think a friend would hurt you, but a true friend will tell you what you need to hear for what's best for you. So to be able to receive from somebody in a constructive sort of way to build you up and to be able to receive it, that's a good thing. Because there's things about us that we do that I'm sure we don't even know we do. A few years ago, I got glasses, and I was preaching, filling the pulpit for a friend who was on vacation at his church. And so as I was speaking, I found myself touching my glasses, maybe doing like this, taking them off, put them on, do this kind of thing. And I didn't know I was doing it. It was kind of like a subconscious thing. So on the way home, I was driving on the way home, and my wife said, hey, honey, can I tell you something? I wanted so badly just to go, no, and just keep driving, but you know what that's like. So I said, okay, go ahead. She goes, honey, you've touched your glasses so much. It was distracting. I said, I don't touch my glasses. And my son chirped up in the back seat. He goes, yes, you do, Dad. I counted. You touched your glasses 135 times. I didn't even know that. It was just something that I did. There's things about us that we can do, pick up habits, tics, or whatever we want to call them, and we may have that about us that could be annoying or get in the way of us being effective. So if someone comes up to you, someone who loves you, say it has your best interest in mind, comes up to you and say, hey, can I tell you something? A healthy person would learn to say, yes, please, I want to know what it is. What's keeping me from being more effective in my public life? So to be able to receive from somebody shrinks that box, which only opens up my public self-life to be more effective. Johari discovered something that I think the scriptures teaches us when it comes to self-awareness. The last box is the unknown self box. This is the box that we don't know anything about ourselves and others don't know. It's yet to be discovered. Maybe it's the part that only God knows about us. And so there's a verse in Jeremiah that says that the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? We don't even know ourselves. We know parts of ourselves. We may not know all of ourselves. God does. The unknown self, how would we know about that box if nobody knows about it? And I think the answer to that is we do have an understanding that life is progressive. So we know that there's things yet to be learned. We don't know everything. There's a few people that might think they know everything, but those are usually unhealthy people. So we know in our own right that there's things yet to be learned. And so what is it about the unknown self that we have yet to learn? So it could be things like maybe we have talents and gifts that have been buried or hidden for some reason. I lost my dad about 12 years ago, and I love my dad. He was a good father. He was a trucker. He was a Marine. He was a tender, tough guy. He taught me about the Lord, and yet he also knew how to work on cars and deal with people. And I lost him about 12 years ago, and I remember going through the pain and the grief of losing my father. I still miss him today. My father's death caused me to face things about myself that I didn't know before. I remember learning God in a way that I didn't know before. I remember learning my family in ways that I didn't know before. I've learned things about myself that I didn't know before. It helped me to know how to be a better pastor. So even in my times of grief and my hardship or suffering, it's helped me to be a better person in my public life. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 9 kind of talks about that. I've often thought, if God wanted to teach us something that we didn't know, how would he do that? And I think the generalized answer to that is he probably put us through a life experience. And actually, that's all we know about life is what we've experienced. Now, we can learn objectively, like through school or reading, but we still filter it through our experiential knowledge. It's our life experiences that helps us to grasp the truths and the realities of life. And so if God wanted to teach us something that we didn't know, it's probably that true that he's going to put us through a life experience. Sometimes we call those trials or tribulations or hardships or even suffering. And so if God wanted to enlarge our unknown self, it may be that he puts us through a trial. In 1 Peter chapter 1, he talks about that even though we're kept by the promises of God, we will have to face trials in every circumstances. These have come so that our faith will be more genuine, which, by the way, it says that it's more precious than refined gold. So apparently what fire is to gold when it comes to refining it, which is about an 1800, 2000 degree fire. It purifies, it liquefies it, the impurities rises to the top, they call it dross. They harden up the gold and is more pure, more precious. Apparently what fire is to gold, trial is to our faith. And so if you're going through a hardship right now or difficulty, and you might think like, why me? That's our tendency, why me, Lord? Instead of saying, why me, maybe the more appropriate response would be, what is it, Lord? What is it, Lord, that I need to learn in this? And by learning whatever lesson God has for us, as it prepares us and makes us, shrinks that box, which only makes us better in our public self-life. So I agree with Joe and Harry on the Johari window that they discovered something that Scripture had been teaching us all along, but they condensed it down into a one-page model that I have used so many times in my counseling with other people. It's a great tool. I've learned that by looking at the Johari window, processing it through the Scriptures, that God is very active, constantly active, presently active in all of our lives in the sake of teaching us how to become more like him. If we will allow God that process, it can be a very healthy and a very important thing for us as we go forward in our life. God bless you.